Hello everybody, welcome to today's lesson. Today I will present about overhauling manual transmission, which is week 7 part 2 video. If you remember the last video, I was trying to cover overhauling manual transmission, specifically the removal and the disassembly process. In today's video, I will try to cover three topics, which is inspection of manual transmission, assembly of manual transmission, and installation to the vehicle. The inspection of system includes, or the inspection of gearbox includes, like cleaning, visual inspection, and instrumental inspection. Obviously, in different automotive parts, we will clean each parts uh, before we perform inspection because it misleads our reading because when we use dial indicator, micrometer, filler gauge, the dirt or the dust that have on the parts will give us wrong result. So cleaning process will be performed by using parts washer to clean components. We must remove dirt, like debris and old lubricants if it's integrated on system. Next, we should dry components with compressed air or clean clothes before we proceed to inspection. After that, we should perform some visual inspection. This visual inspection includes like inspect gear case for wear and damage, check bearing for smooth rotation and wear, examine synchronizer ring, shift forks, rails, and detent mechanism. Just look for crack or damage in the casing. Look for damage and sign of overheating on the gears. So we should check visually on each part if there is some crack, something. By the way, if there is crack, we can use magnetic crack detection or dye penetrant for detecting crack if that is not easily visible for our eye. Uh, as you observe in the instrumental inspection, we can use like vernier caliper, filler gauge, dial indicator for checking different measurements, for checking the flange, the synchronizer, the oil clearance, the truss clearance, and the fork and the sleeve where the run out of the shaft. So we will see this one in detail one by one in the next slides. Let's come to the first thing, inspection of output shaft assembly. In output shaft, we can inspect or we can perform inspection of or we can measure each gear thrust clearance by using filler gauge. Most of the time when the thrust washer or the thrust snap ring are worn out, the clearance between the sleeve and the gear or between the bearing and the gear is too much high and it leads for wobble and it creates some noise. The standard clearance for example, first, second, third, and fourth gear, which means the measurement is performed on each gear thrust clearance. So the standard clearance for this one is, for example, I get as a sample from one uh, manual, uh, 0.1 up to 0.25. So if it is beyond 0.30, which means it will have it will cause high end play, uh, and it will create some noise or damage on the uh, helical gears because the helical gear not must not be moved side to side. If there is some in play, it will create some damage. So at this time, we should use some truss washer for maintaining the privilege. The next part includes inspection of backup light switch. So inspection of backup light switch, it can be, of course, this is an electrical system. So we can check this one by means of continuity or by means of resistance. So, which means by pushing the switch, because the switch will have two terminals, we will connect our multimeter or ohmmeter in both terminals, and by pushing and making free, we check the condition. For example, when we push the button, there must be some continuity, because this is normally open switch. When we push this one by selector lever, it makes on the backup light, which means it closes the switch. So we must assure that one. When we make it free, it must be like open. So that means the backup light must be off when we remove, or when we just select neutral, or when we remove from the clutch, I mean the reverse gear. The next and the critical test we perform is inspection of synchronizer. This synchronizer is like the improvement that come from the slide mesh gearbox. Before the gears are selected by means of half sleeve, the synchronizer will try to synchronize both parts. For that synchronization, it uses this groove. You see, the internal part is threaded for first for the sake of creating better braking effect. The second one for the passage of lubricant, and the third one is to prevent uh, the stack, because if it is smooth and if it have some lubricant, by means of vacuum, it will attach with the gear, the conical part of the gear. And for this reason, it's grooved like this, see, a different direction. So, which means we will check or inspect this synchronizer. The first one, we can check the braking effect. To check the braking effect, what we need to do is we must press the synchronizer against the gear, and we try to rotate. If we press and try to rotate, the synchronizer must not be rotated alone. We call this one braking effect or synchronization. If it rotate means the synchronizer internal part is already worn, so the synchronizer ring should be replaced. So this will lead some noise while we upshift or downshift in specific gear. The next one, we can visually inspect this part. Always when it's engaged and disengaged by means of hub sleeve, this part will be damaged. So we should check whether this part is damaged or not. So if this part is damaged, we should replace. The next, we must check the clearance between the gear and the synchronizer ring. So the ring back and the gear spline end. So as you observe here, by pressing this one, we must insert some filler gauge or thickness gauge. We must check this clearance. That means if this clearance is narrow, the conical part or the synchronizer inner ring will be worn. So this one is one best indicator of the synchronizer internal part health. Look, if this threaded or groove part is worn, this clearance will be narrow. So at this time also, we should replace the synchronizer. Uh, Here, there is some standard clearance. If you see this clearance, the standard clearance is 0.7 up to 17 mm. The minimum clearance should be 0.5. If it is below 0.5, we must replace the synchronizer ring. That means already the synchronizer ring is worn, so it cannot create enough uh, braking effect. This is one thing. So we should check all first and second gear synchronizer, third and fourth gear synchronizer. We should check these three things in all speed gears. The fourth part is inspection of main shafts, gear, oil clearance. If you remember, last time what I told you is the main shaft gear is simply supported by bearing and it will have internally clearance for the passage of oil. So if uh, our gearbox is working for a long period of time, there will be some wear. So to detect or to check that if the clearance is high or low, we can check the dial indicator. Simply, it seems tough, but we can check simply in some case or in some shafts. If you remember, we was checking the oil clearance by means of telescopic gauge and micrometer by measuring the outside diameter of the shaft and the internal part of the gear. But in this part, it's not preferable to perform that task. What we need to do is simply, sorry, what we need to do is simply we can connect and make preload the real indicator. After that, we try to move the gears. So that movement, the detection, we call that one oil clearance. And this oil clearance range is for the first and second gear, 0.09 up to 0.06 mm. If you observe, it's very narrow uh, distance. That's why we need to clean every part before we perform these tests. For the third gear, it's around 0.6 up to 0.1. So it's a little bit higher. It's according to the diameter of the internal gear. The maximum clearance given for this part is for the first and second 0.515 mm. For the third gear, 0.2. So if the clearance exceeds the limit, we should replace the gear, shaft, or the needle bearing. So by replacing these parts, uh, just we can check which part is damaged more. By replacing that part, we can simply decide, make correct the faults. The next part is measure or inspect the fork. So in the fork part, uh, in some manuals, it's better to perform two measurement. Uh, in another manual, it requests two measurement. If you observe this one, simply in synchronizer, we should check. Sorry, in synchronizer, we should check the wear of half sleeve, whether the shift fork and half sleeve have some wear, because this part is always the rotating part and this one is stationary. So always there will be some friction. So if that friction is higher, maybe the clearance between the fork and the half sleeve is very high. So we should check that clearance by means of feeler gauge. Next, we can measure also the tip measurement of the fork. So, which means when we upshift and downshift, simply this uh, tip part will be worn because, as I expressed before, this is always rotating with the shaft, always rotating with the shaft because it's connected with the half. And when we shift, half of the part will be connected with the speed gear. So if this part is rotating and if this part is stationary, the tip will be worn. So we should check the end clearance and the tip thickness of the fork. Also, we can check the sleeve part. Visually, we can inspect. So the maximum clearance is 1 mm. If it's exceed, replace the shift fork or the half sleeve by observing which part is damaged. The next one is inspect the synchro clutch sleeve or the half sleeve. Uh, as you observe, the half sleeve internal part is seems like this. So this half sleeve is always, as I expressed before, connects the speed gear and uh, the half. So which means When it repetitively engage and disengage, of course, especially if the synchronizer is not properly work, the half sleeve will be, this tip part will be weird, and this make will become triangle. That means if the tip is seems triangle, which means it's an indication of wear. So if there is an indication of wear, we should uh, check and replace this part. So if you observe this one, this part always engage with, this is the gear spline and this is the half sleeve. At the half part, it's interconnected with the hub. So if this part is damaged, we should check. If the part also in the internal part will have some chamfer, we should check this one also. The next, we should inspect the output shaft flange. One reason for excessive thrust clearance is if this flange is like wear or worn, it creates end plane or thrust clearance. So we should check this flange by means of vernier caliper. The maximum, I mean, the thickness should be 5.6. If it is below this one, we should replace the flange. uh, like the flange, sometimes we will have some inner race. This inner race will put in this part, we will put the I mean the speed gear and ring. In the internal part, it will have some shaft. So this inner race flange also should be checked. Sometimes if, again, if this thickness will be low, it creates the same problem like the previous one. For the gear will be have too much in the play, and the specification for this gearbox what I get is 4.76. You should check this one accordingly with types of gearbox. The next one is inspection of shaft runout. We should check the shaft runout. To check the shaft runout, we should use dial indicator, and we must have some V block or support block. By putting the support block and by supplying preload and by rotating, we must record the maximum reading. So we must assure that if there is some bend on this part, if there is some bend on this part, so the maximum runout should be 0.06. If that is beyond the limit, we should replace this shaft. And in the oil clearance, we must check also or measure the reverse idler shaft oil clearance. Again, we use the same procedure with the previous issue. We must move up and down by using the dial indicator, or by uh, employing the dial indicator. We can check the specified a maximum clearance is expressed here. So if it's beyond, we should replace the shaft or the gear for the reverse part. After perform inspection, we should compare with the specification, and accordingly, based on the recommendation of the manufacturer, we must replace or repair the parts. Mostly the most part will be replaceable. So we should replace, and after we replace the part, we must assemble the gearbox. When we see the assembly process, we must follow some procedures. Before assembling the transmission, we must locate and assemble any new replacement part. You see, for this part, we should use the exploded view of the manual. So we must know in which part, which component is mounted. So next, like if two gears are operating in mesh, and if we observe some which wear pattern, usually the gears must be replaced, and the corresponding gear must at the same time replaced, because if there is two mating gears, and if one gear is worn, by default it will affect the life of the other gear. So we must check that one. It's better if we replace the mating gear or the correspond inspect the corresponding gear. And we should use a new gear oil when with an old gear can result, sorry, using a new gear with an old gear can result in unacceptable gear noise because one is new and the previous one is damaged, so which will create some noise on this part. Next, preparation. During assembly process, we should prepare, ensure all components are clean and ready, review the manufacturer's manual and guidelines for tightening torque, for mounting process. We must check. Uh, we must assure that we must have tools like wrench, screwdrivers, and torque wrench, like gear puller, bearing press, seal installer, which will be critical. We must assure that the lubricant, gasket, and seals are collected appropriately. Next, we should follow step by step. Install like the bearing race, assembly the gear on shaft, install synchronized shift fork, fit the shaft into the gear casing, uh, ensure proper alignment, check gear alignment and engagement, ensure synchronizer are functionally or correct. So these are the critical steps we need to follow. Then we must have some final steps. In the final step, we should install the shift mechanism, place the gearbox cover and secure, install seal and gasket. This, if you observe this one, we should just follow the reverse procedure what we are following in disassembly. That means uh, first out means last in. So we must follow this principle. Next, lubrication is critical. Apply the correct lubricant to gear and bearing. Ensure that all moving parts are well lubricated before you install. Some bearings, something which requires some lubricant, so you must assure accordingly with the manufacturer's recommendation. So this is what the installation process should include. After installation of parts or after assembly of part, we should install into vehicle, which means we must put back to the vehicle. So in this installation process, just initially we should ensure that uh, the vehicle is securely lifted and supported, verify the clutch and flywheel condition if that is appropriate. When we install, we should align the gearbox with the engine, secure the gearbox to the engine mount with the appropriate torque, and we must use appropriate support. Connect the shaft, linkage, drive shaft, and other component appropriately. At the end, we must perform some tests. We should test or verify the smooth gear in shifting, check for leak and proper operation. After that, we can finish our task. So this is what I have. Thank you for your attention. It's almost the final part of chapter 3. So if you have any question, comment, and suggestion, you are welcome. Have a nice time. Bye bye.